Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. My name is Brandon, and this is freestatecolorado.com. Today I'm doing a presentation on the Colorado Legislative session of 2021. We'll talk about some of the bills that were introduced, the bills that failed, and some of the bills that passed. This year was excessive in the abuse of authority that the legislature took. They restricted our rights on many levels, and I really hope this presentation is a wake-up call to a lot of people who are maybe interested in getting involved in politics here in our state or in our local communities, and maybe are holding back a little bit. But I gotta tell you, we need you. If you believe in freedom, you believe in liberty, you got to get involved. You got to know what's going on, because you're probably not going to like what these politicians are trying to do to our society. So this presentation was originally given at Liberty on the Rocks on June 16th, 2021. Today is July 8th, 2021. So I will be happy to go through this with everybody who wasn't there. Thank you for if you were there at Liberty on the Rocks. It's a great social and educational event that occurs twice a month in Denver. Definitely check it out. I'll have links below. But for now, let's get into what the legislature did this year, what they attempted to do, the good, the bad, the ugly. What was the damage this time? Well, national politics often take up the majority of the attention for most people who pay attention to political news. However, what happens in our community, our city, and our state have a bigger impact on our lives than what happens at the national level. Whether it's raising a family, starting a business, collecting a paycheck, driving to work, and nearly every aspect of our lives are all affected by the deeds of the local political class. So I hope you find this presentation interesting, educational, and infuriating, and I hope it motivates you to become a local liberty activist. Here's a general outline of what I'll be going over today. I'll start with a broad view and then narrow my focus in on specific legislation that was introduced in the Colorado State Legislature this year. Who am I? Why should you listen to me? Like I said, my name is Brandon. I'm a Colorado native, former world traveler, and local political junkie, I guess you could say. I actually, for several years here in Colorado, made my living working in Colorado's political scene. Started out volunteering like so many people do back in 2014, spurred by the anti-gun recalls that took place in the subsequent elections. Very excited times back then for liberty activists, for sure. I then worked for a gun rights organization, the great National Association for Gun Rights. Highly recommend you become a member of that group. They are doing great work. Their local affiliate, Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, kicks a lot of butt and fights very hard to preserve our rights. After that, I started working on campaigns. I worked in state senate, state house, county commissioner races. Even I worked on a governor's race and a U.S. Senate race. I really got to see how the sausage was made, however, when I worked at the state capitol. In 2017, I was a legislative aide and really saw the behind the scenes of how bills become laws, how lobbyists influence the political process, and kind of all that inside baseball that most people are completely unaware of. Now, somebody who loves liberty and freedom, I got to tell you, it was horrific, but like I said, very educational. The reality of politics is not what is normally presented in schools or on the news. Politics is a power game where money and control over others is the goal. Now, for most of those involved in politics, government is the means by which a person can bring their ideals to reality. By stealing the wealth of the taxpayers and threatening violence on individuals, the political class uses their perceived legitimacy to force people into a world of their making. Now, some of what I'm going to be speaking about may upset you, but I hope you leave this presentation with a sense of optimism and hope. Because to understand the nature of our society, we must become aware of how individuals in our society are using the political process. If we want to be free, we must understand the nature of our oppression. Awareness of what is happening is the beginning of understanding our situation. And only when we can understand our situation can we hope to act intelligently. So I'll start with a brief overview of Colorado's political environment, then shift my focus to the state legislature, and then the meat of what I'll talk about is actually legislation that was introduced in 2021, bills that became law and bills that failed, and then a brief conclusion. So talking about Colorado's political environment, you're probably aware of some of this, but for those of you that aren't, I think this is important information to understand the context of everything that happens politically in our state. One state, many political subdivisions. The current estimated population of Colorado is 5.9 million people living in 64 counties and 271 municipalities. In addition to the 64 counties, there are 65 state house and 35 state senate districts. I also wanted to mention district attorneys because they are a powerful political force in their own right that is often overlooked in political discourse. Now, do you know, those of you watching this, do you know who your state representative, your state senator, your district attorney, your city council, do you know who these people are, even your congressman? I think it's important that you are aware of what they're doing and the damage that they might be causing your society, your community. So moving on. Let's talk a little bit about the state constitution. Of course, that's where the Colorado Legislature gets its legitimacy, is from the state constitution. Some of the highlights that I find interesting are that in 1912, Colorado became a home rule state, one of 30 in the United States. So home rule state basically amended the Constitution to grant municipalities the ability to exercise local control of their individual governments. I do believe decentralization of power is one of the most important things that liberty activists or lovers of freedom should be working towards. Tabor, of course, the demon of the left or the authoritarians in our society, in our state, and the saving grace by which Colorado has become such an economically vibrant place to live. Tabor was passed in 1992. It was just over 111,000 votes that was the margin of victory. So pretty slim in the grand scheme of things. Now 1992, it's less of a slim, that was a smaller number, I guess, then than it was now in terms of the margin. But still, the Tabor passed and became law, preventing the Colorado government from raising taxes without approval of Coloradans. So very, very important. We have seen a lot of attempts by the Colorado political class to subvert Tabor, to take more of our money, to steal more of our money without our consent. We'll talk a little bit about that during this presentation. Amendment 64, if you believe in self-ownership and individual sovereignty, then of course it's very important that Colorado became the first state to legalize cannabis, beating Washington by a few hours, or at least the time zone difference. Now, Amendment 64 got on the ballot with less than 4,400 votes. Now that's, of all the votes they collected, their margin to get on the ballot was only 4,400. I want to be clear on that. So really, it was kind of close. And then in 2012, when it passed with a margin of victory of just over 266,000 votes. So also pretty slim. So take note that some of this legislation or some of these ballot initiatives don't necessarily require 50%, 90% of the Colorado population to accept them. Gun ownership is enshrined in the Colorado Constitution. Article 2, Section 13 of the Colorado Constitution states, quote, "The right of no person to keep and bear arms in defense of his home, person, and property, or in aid of the civil power when thereto legally summoned, shall be called in question. But nothing herein contained shall be construed to justify the practice of carrying concealed weapons." Very unfortunate, end quote. A very unfortunate last sentence there, where the Constitution specifically says that carrying concealed weapons is not justified in the state constitution as it was written. However, that's really the only restriction they mention. So it is interesting to see that line, "The right of no person to keep and bear arms shall be called in question." Are the state legislators and local politicians violating that constitutionally enshrined right now? I would say yes, but I think it's important to remember that it's in there. Also, regarding the state legislature, there is a single subject requirement. So Section 21 of Article 5 of the Constitution basically says that, quote, "No bill except general appropriation bills shall be passed containing more than one subject, which shall clearly be expressed in its title." So this really does, end quote. So this really does restrict the ability of the legislators to cram a lot into one bill to try and cover many bases with one piece of legislation. They do kind of get around that sometimes. They do get caught and stopped. Sometimes the legislators do. Some of their bills are stopped because of the single subject requirement. But in my opinion, not enough of them are stopped. So that's pretty interesting, I think, as well. All right, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about the state legislature as it sits. So also in the Colorado Constitution, Article 5 establishes basically when the Colorado General Assembly will be called into session. Section 7 of Article 5 says that the Assembly is to convene its regular session no later than the second Wednesday of January of each year. So mid-January each year, second Wednesday, that's when the legislature convenes. So they're obviously, right now it's July 2021. They'll be back in the saddle, causing more trouble for Colorado taxpayers and Colorado citizens back in January. And then regular sessions. This continues in Section 7 of Article 5 in the state constitution. Regular sessions of the legislature are not to exceed 120 calendar days. So they are restricted. Thankfully, the legislature cannot meet year-round. This year we saw a little bit of abuse of that because they stretched the legislative session out quite a bit longer than it should have been. However, there's only 120 meeting days with other days spaced out. So were the legislators and the staff working during those days? Probably. Were they violating the state constitution? Well, they were at least manipulating it. So right now, as of 2021, this will change after the most recent census results become enacted or become influencing the elections here in the future. Currently, the Colorado Legislature has 100 members. That's 35 in the Senate and 65 in the House. Each senator represents 144,000 Coloradans, and each representative over 77,000 Coloradans. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who finds it difficult to believe that any one person can accurately represent such a diverse and multivariate group of tens of thousands of unique individuals, but I digress. Senators are elected for 4-year terms and House representatives for 2-year terms. And they all make, or they're each paid, $40,242 per year. Every legislator at the state level has an 8-year term limit. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the balance of power and the makeup of the legislature. So since 2016, the Democratic Party of Colorado has the majority in both houses. Now I'd like to point out, if you look at the graphic there, that in 2014, Republicans took back the state Senate after the successful recall effort that took place following the horrific, evil 2013 gun control legislation that Democrats pushed through. That includes the magazine ban and the universal background checks, which are still with us today. Hopefully they'll be repealed in the future. In 2021, Republicans have 24 seats in the House and Democrats have 41 seats. The Senate has 15 Republicans and 20 Democrats. This year's legislative session saw a change in how the legislature operates, as I mentioned before. Instead of the usual consecutive 120-day working session, the legislature split their days up throughout the last 6 months, ending in mid-June. So it's crazy. So on June 8th, the legislature adjourned, and then Jared Polis from that point had 30 days to veto bills passed during the last 10 days of the session before they became law. So we're basically past that now, so everything has been signed or vetoed or allowed to become law without signature at this point. We've reached that conclusion of the legislative session here in July. So normally during the regular session, bills automatically become law within 10 days of transmittal from the legislature to the governor's office unless vetoed, but 30 days on those last week of the session or last 10 days of the session, because there's so much crammed in at the end, it's a little more practical that way. As I mentioned earlier, another major issue regarding the legislature is that due to the 2020 census, districts will be redrawn in accordance with the changes in population. So the census redistricting will be a big shakeup for the state legislature, for the House members, senators. Some of them might find themselves out of their districts. There's probably going to be more representatives. So it'll be interesting times and potential opportunities for people who believe in freedom and want to become politically active at the state level. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about some of the drama that was seen this year at the legislative session. So, you know, politics is mostly reactive. Politicians react to previous events. And as I've mentioned, politicians use politics to shape a society of their own design. Some of the big trouble that some of the political leaders got in trouble this year on was, well, Jared Polis, the governor, actually threatened to veto a controversial climate bill. You know, Polis is a definite authoritarian who does not have the best interest of Coloradans at heart, in my opinion. However, it was good to see him stand up against this radical proposition, which would have required basically the oil and gas industry and other companies and businesses, industries in Colorado to control their emissions and really restrict economic activity. I mean, basically, this environmental legislation is putting us back in the dark ages. So it was nice to see Polis threaten it. The bill got reworked. Unfortunately, there was a bad climate bill that did pass that Polis did sign. However, it could have been worse than it was. So that's something I want you to take away from this as well, is that as bad as things seem, they're not as bad as they could be. And with right people working and getting involved, they can be better than they are now. On the Republican side, House Minority Leader Hugh McKean got in some big trouble with his caucus and with conservatives in Colorado, in the Republican Party in particular, because, quote, now this is from a representative, a Republican representative down in southern Colorado, who gave me these direct quotes about Hugh McKean. Hugh McKean, as the House Minority Leader, exercises some power over his caucus. However, quote, McKean's been compromising with Democrats all session, end quote. He engages in retaliation against conservatives. He helps the press attack conservatives. He jumps on Democrat bills and pushes other Republicans to provide cover to their agenda too. He was okay spending excess money from the state and federal government for stimulus. So Hugh McKean has not been a friend to conservatives in the legislature. He's been a really bad leader, has not been able to actually get enough caucus dues from the members. Really a lot of dissatisfaction in the Colorado legislature with Hugh McKean. He even sponsored a gun control bill that supposedly he was just confused on. But regardless, we'll kind of get into some of that. Moving on. So in the 2021 legislative session, it was bad. It was really bad. 623 bills were introduced. 502 were passed. Now, there's some great quotes here from Senator Bob Rankin. He said, I think the theme is they did whatever they wanted to do. We're going to live with some bad bills for years to come. I would like to see some independent thinking from their side of the aisle. So they did pass some extremely radical bills that we will see here, some massive tax increases, probably the largest we've seen in a long time. And then Ben Murray of the Independence Institute also has a great article recently about Jared Polis, which I'll post below. But Ben Murray said, with the 2021 Colorado regular legislative session concluded, lawmakers have approved tax and fee increases on Coloradans of up to $617 million annually without voter consent. So that is insane. $617 million per year taken out of the Colorado economy to go to these special interest projects of the Colorado's political class. Basically these social engineering schemes and authoritarian doctrines that are going to impoverish our society. So no bueno, friends, no bueno. The Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce CEO, Kelly Brew, who actually resigned, she said that much of the legislative session felt like an exhausting haul for the business community. I'm sure it was. She said it was one in which we were constantly on the defense, it felt, against the wall, fighting for our members and their employees. The session felt longer because we were still recovering from a global pandemic, and the scope of legislative issues felt broader than ever before. So we saw broad attacks on every aspect of our lives as Coloradans from the state legislature. And friends, it's more important than ever to get involved, run for office, or get involved in some local candidates' races. At least understand who your politicians are that represent you, and do your best to hold them accountable come election time. So we do actually have some rock star Colorado legislators. We got to talk about some of the good guys down there. This is the Republican Liberty Caucus of Colorado's annual Liberty Scorecard for 2021. So it's a measure of how state lawmakers vote according to constitutional principles. So that's individual rights, free markets, and limited government. So awesome. So as you can see here, Patrick Neville, rock star, 96 score. Shane Sandridge, 96 score as well, rock star. Dave Williams, rock star, 93. Kim Ransom, Kevin Van Winkle, Ron Hanks, Stephanie Luck. Stephanie Luck's race was one that they took back from the Democrats, so very important that she gets the kind of support she needs for her re-election campaign. Got to keep that seat. Daniel Woog was 75. He has sponsored some very interesting bills we'll talk about. Pretty cool stuff. Tim Geithner, Terry Carver, Mark Baisley. Mark Baisley got a lot of attention in 2020 because he was questioning the coroner results where they were calling everything a death from the COVID as opposed to natural causes or some of the other reasons people were dying. So good for him. And then Andres Pico with the 69. So those are some of the rock stars. Unfortunately, there's more anti-freedom losers in the Colorado Legislature than there are rock stars. So these these few here, these 12, this slide, I could add multiple slides of all the anti-freedom losers in the Colorado Legislature. I mean, these people all have less than all single-digit scores. I mean, terrible. We can skip kind of talking about him except for a few, like Steve Fenberg. He's particularly evil. He supports massive gun control, especially after the tragedy earlier this year in Boulder. He basically wants an assault weapons ban in Colorado. Bad dude. Authoritarian, anti-freedom loser for sure. Alec Garnett, also a big loser. We'll talk about him in a coming slide, but he's terrible. Mike Weissman, that guy's a nut job. Drea Cavero, she's the one who sponsored a lot of the anti-cannabis legislation and really alienated a lot of young people and people in the cannabis industry from the Colorado Democratic Party this year. Chris Hansen, that guy, that guy's kind of a strange one. Was it him? Actually, I think it was Alec Garnett that you see crying down at the state legislature a couple years ago in 2018. That guy's a well. Anyways, Dominic Moreno. I mean, the list goes on and on, friends. These guys are about as loser as you can get. Well, anyways, let's talk about some of the legislation. This is what we're here for. What was introduced, what passed, and what failed. Another current state rep who I used to work with said, quote, pick an issue and it was attacked. There's probably 10 new government agencies. A public option, a healthcare public option that was too extreme for Obamacare, and climate extremism. Those were some of the taglines that that representative gave me. So some of the issues I want to talk about are taxes. Hold on to your wallet. COVID, attempts to restrict government. So some actually good COVID bills that were introduced, of course, that were killed. Business regulations, election integrity, another massive issue that came up. Criminal justice, in particular gun ownership and cannabis, and other notable legislation. So some bills passed, some bills failed, and a lot of craziness down there this year. So let's get into taxes. Taxes, more of our money stolen. Taxation, my friends, is theft. It doesn't belong to them, it belongs to us. They have no justification for stealing money out of your paycheck. I want to talk about Senate Bill 21-260. Now, on the website, I will have all of these hyperlinked. You can go through the PDF of this presentation and click on any of these for more in-depth details. So this entire presentation will be on the website right below the video. So please look through it and leave me a comment with any questions you have. So this is the sustainability of the transportation system. So this basically, as we know, Colorado's roads are terrible. You can't drive 2 blocks without hitting a pothole. We're on a state highway. Your car better be nut and bolted, put together pretty well, otherwise it'll fall apart on you. But the big problem with this bill, even though everybody knows Colorado needs money for the roads, instead the Colorado politicians use that money for their little special interest projects. This bill in particular basically created a whole new series of taxes designed as fees. So we're talking electric vehicle registration fees, gas and diesel fees. So when you go to fill up your gas tank, there's going to be more fees. Delivery fees. So you get retail delivery, they're going to start charging you fees. So if you order food that's delivered to you, there's going to be fees on that. Passenger ride services fees. So that's your Uber, Lyft, rideshare type stuff. Short-term vehicle rental fees. I mean, they're going to make it very expensive to drive a car in Colorado. Terrible. And that's how they're going to pay for it, is restrict our ability to travel and steal more of our money to do so. So, of course, why are they doing fees? Because they can't do taxes. TABOR requires voter approval, and tax increases in Colorado fail. Taxpayers and voters in Colorado don't want to have more of their money stolen by this stupid political class. So what these politicians do is circumvent the Constitution and circumvent getting consent of the voters to just basically say, well, it's not a tax, it's a fee. We're charging you a fee. Bunch of BS is what it is. Well, anyways, this transportation bill, Senate Bill 260, 163 pages, $5.3 billion involved. It indexes fees to inflation and National Highway Construction Costs Index, so those fees will increase. They're not going to just stay at the same rate. 4 new state enterprises. You can read through those, but basically new state businesses. And why four? Why didn't they just create one new state enterprise? Well, Proposition 117 that passed last year in 2020 requires voter approval for any agency that the government creates over $100 million. So instead of creating one agency that's going to be a lot of money, they create four smaller agencies to avoid having to go to the taxpayers and having to go to the voters. It's basically it's not representative democracy, folks. This is autocratic idiocy and economic foolishness, basically. Well, anyways, this new branch of CDOT, just what you need: environmental justice and equity, because that's how we're going to fix our roads, is through environmental justice and equity. Silliness is what that is. One good thing, it does increase emission tests from 7 years to 10 years. So you buy a new car, you can wait 10 years before you go to emissions instead of 7. Oh, it's okay, that's okay. But it does increase the TABOR limit by 225 million. Cancels a ballot initiative that was supposed to come up here in 2021, asking voters for some money or for transportation. So basically, as we can see, it's very apparent they're circumventing voter approval to do this. The sponsors of this bill are some of the worst offenders in the Colorado Legislature, such as Fenberg, Winter, Garnett, and Gray. Bad stuff. So this means gas taxes, 14 cents a gallon by 2029. So when you go to fill up, that's about $8 in taxes every time you fill up, about $400 a year for most people. Now, if you spend a lot of time on the road for your work, expect to pay more, expect to take home less money to your family. So basically, this is absolutely insane. Spend and raise more than $5 billion over the next 11 years. If you own an electric or hybrid vehicle, now there's a $90 a year fee for that. $90 a year fee, not a tax, it's a fee. There's going to be a tax on taxi rides, Uber and Lyft, 30 cents per ride. I mean, it's going to add up pretty quick. Online shoppers, ordering from Grubhub or any place like that, it's an extra quarter. Another interesting point, and I'll link the article that discusses a lot of this, a really good article, but it says that Democrats have cunningly scheduled the new taxes to take effect after the election in 2022. So they got these taxes, these fees and tax increases going, but voters aren't going to feel the burden of them until after the next election campaign for these idiot legislators. Now, Republican House Minority Leader Hugh McKean, we gave him a little bit of grief earlier, but he called that ploy to move these tax increases to after the next election as, quote, gerrymandering of policy. That's a trick and it should not be allowed. He says that's not right. And you know what? He's right there. The voters are making decisions on the next election before they feel the pain caused by some of the bills passed in 2021. So very deceptive, very scheming, very manipulative. That is your Colorado political class. Moving on to taxes, of course, more of your money stolen. Politicians trying to steal every penny they can from you. House Bill 1311 and 1312 were the tax fairness for Coloradans package. Of course, fairness means stealing more of our money to give to the politically connected. So House Bill 1312 eliminates tax breaks for insurance, oil, gas, and coal industries. Of course, energy companies, the energy industry in Colorado is a big target of the Democrats. They want to basically send everybody back to the Stone Age if they could. Also, one good thing, it did expand the business personal property tax exemption, so that's good. House Bill 1311, roll back tax breaks for Colorado's wealthiest residents. So 529 college savings account for your children. Well, guess what? You can't really put tax-free money in there as much as you could. So they're penalizing people who are saving for their children's college funds. That's the scam these people are running. And of course, they're going to expand the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. So they're going to basically redistribute money and redistribute wealth. A couple other bills, talk about Senate Bill 293. This one was very interesting. Michael Fields of Colorado Rising Action called it unprecedented. He said that lawmakers are openly trying to thwart the citizen-led initiative process, which speaks volumes about the amount of power they think they have in the state. So Senate Bill 293 was a reaction to basically ballot initiative number 27, which would permanently reduce property taxes after the Amendment B passing last year in the 2020 election. So this Senate Bill 293 would lower property assessment rates for a couple years, and then it would allow homeowners to defer an increase of more than 4% on their property tax bill up to $10,000 on their primary residence. The balance becomes a lien on the property that's paid back when it's sold. So how deceptive is that? Not a really true tax decrease. In fact, you just defer paying your taxes until you sell the house. Thus, you don't get as much money for your house. I mean, a bunch of BS. More of your money stolen as well. Let's continue on the theme of taxes here. Was House Bill 1321. This is a very deceptive as well. They changed the language on tax measures on the ballot. So if it required a tax revenue, the bill would have language about the level of public services funded by the measure and what those public services would be. So it's a response to Taxpayer Bill of Rights. They're trying to get people to accept tax increases on the ballot. So they're trying to basically rig the system to make tax increases look more favorable. What a scam. Politicians are your servants, they are not your leaders, friends. COVID tyranny. Of course, one of the biggest issues last year was the COVID tyranny exercised by our state government, in particular Jared Polis's abuse of his authority. And state health and county health departments have been absolutely tyrannical, restricting the rights of free people. So one of the big bills we'll talk about what had to do with vaccine passports. It was very surprising or disappointing to see Colorado Democrats actually come out in support of vaccine passports and not restrict the use of them. So let's get into some of this. All right, so talking about this here. So the Department of Regulatory Agencies Regulator Authority during declared emergency. That was we're going to start at the top left here. Senate Bill 21-217. Basically, it would concern the authority of a regulator of healthcare professionals during the disaster emergency declared by the governor. Thankfully, this bill was postponed indefinitely. Postponed indefinitely is the terminology they use to kill a bill. But basically, it said it would empower bureaucrats. So basically give regulatory agencies more power when the governor declares a state of emergency. Thankfully, that bill failed. Janal and Milica were the ones behind that. Two bad apples for sure. Moving across to the top right on your screen is the local control of health orders. This was a very good one that Rep. Pico put forward. It would restrict county health orders. So this bill would allow a local governing body to vote to reject or modify a health order issued by a county or district public health agency, public health director, or board of health. So this would mean your city, your municipality, your local community could actually prevent these tyrannical schemes from taking place in your community. That's awesome. So I wanted to show some of these bills that, of course, failed. They failed because the authoritarians are in charge at the state capitol. But with enough good liberty-minded individuals as our representatives and senators, these bills could pass. We could have actually seen a restriction on the governor or the county's ability to take away our rights or to infringe on our rights. They can't take them away, but they can infringe on them. Moving down to the bottom left, Senate Bill 005. This would allow some businesses to open under COVID restrictions. So concerning exemptions from orders requiring businesses to close. So Woodward and Larson there, decent bill, could have been a little bit stronger, but at least they tried. Of course, failed. These bills all have failed here, as you can see. Moving to the bottom right there, House Bill 1032, local government authority statewide disaster declarations. And this was Representative Luck down in southern Colorado. She's awesome. It says this bill allows a local governing body to abrogate all or any portion of a disaster emergency order issued by the governor when the disaster emergency lasts longer than 30 days by adopting a resolution, ordinance, law, or rule. A governing body is required to notify the governor and any affected state agencies of the adoption. The state is prohibited from retaliating against a governing body that takes action under the bill. This includes withholding a monetary payment or any other form of financial assistance. So this bill would have been great because it would have allowed local governments to restrict the state disaster orders. I mean, we wouldn't have seen such devastation to Colorado's economy, including the, not just that, but the rising suicide rates, drug abuse, all the problems that these COVID tyranny has caused in our state could have been prevented if Representative Luck's bill passes. We could stop this from happening again. These are the stakes of getting involved in local politics, my friends. Moving on to some more bills that had failed. We'll start in the top left, work our way across, and then down. House Bill 1080, Non-Public Education in COVID-19 Relief Act. This was Representative Baisley, a pretty good guy. Tax credits for non-government education costs, basically. So allow people to get away from those indoctrination centers called public schools. So that would have been a good one. Senate Bill 36, additional requirements, issue emergency public health order. Concerning additional procedural requirements for the issuance of emergency public health orders. This was a Bob Gardner bill there, Senator Gardner, would have restricted the ability of the governor to issue emergency orders. So another good one. This one could have had a huge impact on the state of Colorado and restricted the governor from taking away our liberty or violating our rights. Moving down to the bottom left, House Bill 1202, off-label use of approved drugs to treat COVID-19. Another one from Representative Luck. This would have been great to allow certain healthcare providers to repurpose therapeutic drugs that have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for another purpose, to provide treatment to individuals with COVID-19. So this would have opened up the ability for doctors to treat their patients and help them out. Awesome. Failed, of course. House Bill 1081, disaster emergency duration limits. Again, this is a Representative Pico bill, restrict governor's ability to implement disaster declaration. Prohibiting the governor from renewing a state or disaster emergency and authorizing the General Assembly to extend a state of disaster emergency. So this would have been awesome. The governor would have had to have gone to the legislature to continue his emergency orders. I mean, this is about balance of power. This is about removing this tyrannical autocracy from our state. Again, it failed. But it could pass if the right people are involved. Last one here on COVID-related bills that failed. This was one of the biggest bills in the legislature this year. Got a lot of information on it. Got a lot of traffic. And by that I mean a lot of interest, and as it should have. House Bill 1191 would have prohibited discrimination against COVID-19 vaccination status. So this was Kim Ransom and Representative Van Bieber, which basically would have prevented the state from having COVID-19 vaccine passports. So a prohibition against discrimination based on the refusal to obtain a vaccine. I mean, that's incredible, right? That's amazing that Colorado Democrats could have stopped. The Colorado Democrats stopped this restriction, this discrimination restriction, and instead allow the state government or local governments to have some sort of vaccine passport plan in the future. I mean, it's absolutely and utterly insane. The one bill that did pass, of course, the COVID-related bill that did pass, and there's probably more than this, but this is the one I thought was interesting, is Senate Bill 2, extending limitations on debt collection actions. So we saw the bills that failed. Bills that failed would have helped our liberties, restricted the government, given us more freedom. Instead, the bill that passed allows people to postpone paying their debts, because that's what we need, is people not paying their debts on time. Shake my head. All right, let's move on to some business regulations here. So the political class is making you poor, stealing money out of your paycheck. You earned it, it belongs to you. If you're entitled to anything in life, it is the money you earn, that's for sure. And more importantly, not even necessarily more importantly, but a bigger picture thinking, not only is your money taken away, but when these politicians destroy markets, they're destroying lives, they're upsetting the entire balance of civil society. So we're going to talk about some business regulations that came up this year during the legislative session. So some of the business regulations that failed, again, we're going to start at the top left and work our way across and then below. House Bill 1062. This was would have been a good bill, and a similar bill did pass, so that was good. But this was deregulation, direct sale of animal shares. So great bill for rural Colorado and for people who eat meat in the state, but basically deregulating the sale of animal meat that's raised here in Colorado. And that was a bipartisan bill with Representative Valdez and Senator Sonnenberg. So that would have been pretty cool if it passed. Another one, this one just kind of made me laugh. Senate Bill 120, open caption requirement for movie theaters. So basically, Senator Janal, Danielson, Rep. Ortiz, and Froelich basically wanted to force businesses to have captioning in their movie theaters. Just idiots. All right, bottom left here, House Bill 1041, private sector enterprise protections. Now, this is a Representative Woog bill, which I think is pretty interesting. I really like this one. I got to read you this bill summary because it really speaks a lot to what's possible if the legislature had liberty-minded people in there. So the bill summary. The bill prohibits state government from passing or implementing any law or rule restricting the natural rights of a private sector enterprise or its customers to use and exercise their free will and free choice to conduct business, exchange goods and services, and take risks in any manner, time, or condition that is acceptable by the private sector enterprise, its customer, and any private sector individuals. I mean, that is amazing. Really cool to see natural rights of a business and consumers and their free will and free choice to conduct business and make their own decisions. How is that not enshrined in the law already? It's something we really should be focusing on, but a great bill allowing businesses, allowing consumers to operate based on their own choice, their own assessment of risk, not the government, some bureaucrat deciding whether we can go shopping or not. Moving over to the bottom right, House Bill 1199, Consumer Digital Repair Bill of Rights. So this has been a big one, as you may have heard. This has been an issue out in California and some other markets, but basically they want to have the right to repair, where manufacturers of digital electronic equipment would have to make it easier for people to be able to repair it. Because right now there's concern of planned obsolescence and the fact that you have to either buy a new phone or a new electronic equipment instead of getting it repaired or being able to repair it yourself. You have to send it in or go to a specialty place. Pretty silly bill. I don't like it, but it's interesting to see that it's come up. And that's Titione, Woodrow, and Rodriguez. Not the brightest bulbs in the legislature for sure. Moving forward to some of the other business regulations that failed. And some of these, it's good that they're failed. Other ones, maybe not so good. Top left, Senate Bill 134, retail liquor stores additional licensing. So it would have allowed retail liquor stores to obtain additional retail liquor store licenses. That's great. Multiple liquor store licenses is a good thing. In particular, over the last couple of years, we've seen now gas stations and supermarkets in Colorado just very recently be able to sell beer. So, it kind of makes it tough for a lot of these liquor store owners because now they have to compete against these big chains. Competition's good, it's healthy, no complaints there, but let's level the playing field, give these liquor store owners the ability to compete a little bit better. That would have been a good one. Of course, it failed. Top right, 1120, licensed private security guards. Glad this one failed. But of course, they want to create occupational licensing, which is evil, for security guards, and that's Caraveo and Weissman, two of the more foolish members of the state legislature. But in general, this, I think, was a response to the terrible tragedy that happened last year in Denver, in which an unlicensed security guard working for the authoritarian 9 News network shot and killed a Patriot Prayer rally goer, I think it was, a guy who made cowboy hats. But anyways, glad the bill failed. We shouldn't be licensing anybody in the state to do a job. Bottom one here, Senate Bill 176, Protecting Opportunities in Workers' Rights Act. Now this one was a big one that would have really hurt our business community in Colorado, so very happy to see this one fail. Basically, it would have created new protections for Colorado workers for discriminatory employment practices, basically creating new protected classes that can't be challenged by any type of employer. So that's marital status, caregiver status, and then broadening the definition of harassment, creating training requirements, creating record-keeping requirements, basically a whole new level of burdens placed on businesses. And nobody would have liked this. I can tell you, everybody who has a job in the state of Colorado would have hated this because there's new training requirements for some sort of perceived discrimination or restrictions on our ability to just go to work and earn a living. Glad to see that fail. Some of the bills that passed, not so great. Some are okay, some are not so great. Starting at the top left, Senate Bill 111, the program to support marijuana entrepreneurs. So that one was kind of interesting, creating a new cannabis advancement program, $4 million in loans, grants, and technical assistance available for marijuana business applicants. But it's a social equity program. So the whole idea is, people who were impacted by the war on drugs when cannabis was illegal, it would allow them basically to have a leg up, give them a little bit of a chance to compete in the marijuana industry. Not a great bill, I think, but interesting nonetheless. In the top right, we're going to look at deregulate meat sales direct to consumers. So we mentioned that one earlier. This one was slightly different, but concerning the sale of animals for consumption to informed end consumers in a manner that exempts the sale from certain laws. So that's pretty good. I'd like to see that expanded even further, but you'll have to read the details if you're interested on that. Again, this presentation, all of these will be hyperlinked at the end, below the video here. But that's Senator Sonnenberg, Pelton, and Valdez we saw again, so some of our rural legislators. That's a good one. Senate Bill 130 in the bottom left, local authority for business personal property tax exemption. Not a bad one, not a bad one. Concerning authorization for local governments to exempt business personal property from taxation. So it would allow local communities to basically collect less taxes. A bipartisan bill there with Holbert, Pedersen, Van Winkle, and Byrd. And then bottom right is 1102, consumer protection for dog and cat purchasers. I didn't like this one. I had no idea about it, but Polis even signed it into law. Basically, Duran, Soper, and Jacques Lewis banning the sale of cats and dogs at pet stores. So basically, yeah, prohibiting pet stores who are not licensed currently from selling cats or dogs. So that's kind of weird. All right, some more business regulations that passed. Top left, we're talking about 1265. Qualified retailer retains sales tax for assistance. So this would basically allow, and the governor did sign this just recently on 6/14, restaurants, bars, catering can keep state sales tax through August. So they're saving $45 million estimated, where they don't have to turn that sales tax in. They can keep it to kind of boost them up and give them an opportunity to recoup some of that lost revenue from the COVID tyranny. Not bad. Why don't we just eliminate the sales tax and give these people a permanent boost? That would be a better idea in my mind. Looking at Senate Bill 39 in the top right, elimination of sub-minimum wage employment. I didn't know much about this, but apparently there was a handful of Colorado companies who were paying workers who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. These companies were able to pay them less than minimum wage under the previous law. Now that's going away. So these people who are not able to make a minimum wage or work a minimum wage job are basically going to be out of work. This program provided an opportunity for these businesses and these workers to get out there and earn a living, at least somewhat of a living. Well, those jobs are going to be outlawed here now that Senate Bill 39 passed. Bottom left, another interesting one, House Bill 1048. A retail business must accept cash. So Colorado businesses required to accept cash starting later this year. So very interesting there. If a business doesn't want to take cash, then they get fined. So kind of interesting. You know, there's a lot of talk about moving to a cashless society or expanding the cryptocurrency as a method of payment. But to see that now the state is forcing businesses to take cash, kind of surprising. Didn't see that one coming. I don't really like the idea of the government forcing businesses to do anything, but it doesn't look like they're trying to get rid of cash at least. Very interesting. Bottom right, Senate Bill 87, agricultural workers' right. This was a terrible one as well. Basically, the idea is that agricultural workers can organize and join unions, strike, receive state minimum wage and overtime pay. So this is going to definitely raise the cost of food, make it harder for local farmers and small farms to employ people. We'll see how this affects things in the future. The idea, anyways, just finishing up on that one, the idea that the government can grant people rights is totally foolish. Your rights are your own. They're God-given rights that you're born with. The government cannot take them away, and they cannot grant new rights. Another big issue that came up this year, as you may imagine, was election integrity. Across the country, state legislatures have been working on election bills after the 2020 election and all the controversy regarding that. Found this extremely fascinating, that 67% of, this is a very recent poll, 67% of Colorado's registered Republicans believe the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. Very interesting. And then also I want to point out in a previous article, I did bring this up on freestatecolorado.com, that Colorado Secretary of State Jen Griswold has received financial support for her campaigns from the Soros family. So Griswold is off her rocker for sure. She's gotten a lot of crazy stuff put through even recently. Going to have to revisit that. But very interesting dynamic when 2/3 of Colorado's registered Republicans think the election was stolen. And then you see the Secretary of State up to all these shenanigans and dealing with shady people and having very shady dealings here. Specifically, the Secretary of State, that CBS 4 article you can see there, the Colorado Secretary of State asks media not to report results on election night. I mean, how more suspicious can you get? Calling on the national media to press pause for democracy. So what do you mean? I mean, press pause for democracy? Help protect our democracy by not calling a presidential winner or loser until the millions of outstanding mail-in ballots are counted. So insane, absolutely insane to see that happen. I mean, come on, how suspicious can you be? There's a map there as well of the 2020 presidential results in Colorado. Red, obviously, for Republican Donald Trump, blue for Democrat Joe Biden. A little bit different than the 2016 map. You'll have to look that one up on your own. But kind of interesting to see which counties went which way. So moving forward, election integrity bills. As you can imagine, they pretty much all failed, but there were some very interesting ones, these 5 in particular. Up at the top left, Senate Bill 007 would improve confidence in election validity. So basically cause in-person voting. That was Senator Paul Lundeen's idea there, to get rid of the mail-in ballot system and go back to voting in person. I kind of like that idea. I think that's probably a good thing. Moving to the top right there, Senate Bill 10, Colorado Ballot Signature Verification Act, Senator Woodward, basically creating signature verification. So this is to strengthen the ballots to make sure they're more valid. So additional security for return ballots for which an elector's self-affirmation is witnessed by another registered elector. So a signature verification, making sure the right people are voting. Bottom left, House Bill 1053, election recount requests. That's Representative Dave Williams, one of the rock stars here in Colorado, by basically concerning election recounts, so people can request, kind of making it easier to request and get election recounts going to make sure that the elections were valid. Of course, the Democrats in charge do not want people recounting the election votes and have completely stood in the way of any type of election integrity or election auditing. As we can see with House Bill 1088, Representative Pico, annual audit statewide voter registration system. So concerning an annual audit of the statewide voter registration system. Apparently the Democrats in charge of Colorado's government do not like audits of the election system. So of course the question is, what are they trying to hide? In the bottom right, we have House Bill 1176, election integrity and voter accuracy. So this one, concerning measures to promote integrity in elections in the state, and in connection therewith, creating the Colorado Bipartisan Election Commission to make recommendations to the Secretary of State and the General Assembly on how to best conduct a comprehensive audit of the state's election processes. Representative Holtorf, another good guy down there. They basically do not want to make sure the votes are accurate. The Democrats in charge like the system as it is now. So let's talk a little bit about criminal justice reform. In particular, two of the biggest issues in Colorado, as we've talked about previously, is guns, as we saw with the 2013 recalls, and cannabis with Amendment 64 that passed in 2012. House Bill 1317 did pass and become a law. This one is going to have huge implications for the marijuana industry in Colorado, particularly those who are on medical marijuana. And it's extremely restrictive, having to do with concentrates or more potent marijuana. The idea behind this was to do a potency cap to prevent too strong of cannabis from being legal, basically to outlaw certain types of cannabis. That's the goal of some of these legislators. Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. But you have to really look into House Bill 1317. That's something I'm going to revisit in the future. Talking about guns. Some of the gun bills passed this year are some of the worst we've seen in a long time. What's interesting is that the Democrats wanted to go even further, but got too much pushback that they couldn't. So that's an encouraging sign. But these bills are really bad. Rep. Holtorf summed it up well. He says, quote, "Our country was founded on rebellion, and there are political winds where I come from. If this continues to go like this, there may be a breaking point." Preach it. All right, moving on to criminal justice legislation that failed. So this is a generic criminal justice legislation, not having to do specifically with guns and specifically with cannabis, although we will talk about those as well. Love this one. Dave Williams with an outstanding bill here. I wish this one passed. House Bill 1175 would have been a donation to nonprofits for traffic violations. How cool would this have been? You're driving to work, you get a speeding ticket, you run a red light, whatever it is. You can resolve a traffic fine by making a donation to a nonprofit entity. That would have been great. This would have basically stopped the practice of policing for profit, in which a lot of law enforcement agencies across the state are relying on fines and criminal penalties to make up part of their budget. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. You're incentivizing these law enforcement officers to go out there and work on collecting revenue instead of trying to solve crimes. Pretty silly. So I hope that one comes back. With the right people in the legislature, House Bill 1175 could become law in the future. Moving along to Senate Bill 74 in the top right. This one was interesting, but basically expunged nonviolent convictions after 3 years. This was Senator Coleman, who's been on a lot of criminal justice legislation recently. Basically, with expungement of convictions records for nonviolent offenses. Don't know how I feel about that one. Probably a bad bill, because if you want to hire somebody, if you want to get them to work for you, it'd be nice to know if they got arrested for a crime, even if it's a nonviolent crime, if they were stealing from their previous employer, if they were committing some sort of fraud. It might be good to know before you hire them. So background checks could be a good thing. Yeah, I don't know, that one's interesting. We'll see how that goes in the future. Bottom left, House Bill 1098. Civil liability for extreme risk protection orders. Love this one from Representative Woog. Would have allowed lawsuits against those restricting gun ownership. So if somebody had a extreme risk protection order, aka a red flag gun confiscation, where law enforcement shows up, confiscates your firearms, and then you are unable to defend yourself, your family, your property because you don't have your firearm because it was taken, then you'd have some recourse to go after the people that took your gun away from you. Makes sense. It's a normal. I mean, this makes sense. It's hard to believe anybody could not support it, but again, they failed to pass it. The Democrats shut that one down, of course. House Bill 1038 in the bottom right, concealed handguns on school grounds, from Representative Pat Neville. As you may remember, Pat Neville is the best pro-liberty legislature in the state General Assembly. Patrick Neville also was at Columbine, a student on that horrific day back in 1999 when so many people were killed. So this is an issue that he brings up every year. I hope it does pass at some point. We're allowing concealed handgun permit holders to carry concealed handguns on school grounds. It could save some lives and avert some tragedy. So glad to see he's always fighting that fight, and hopefully we can make some progress on that in the future. Senate Bill 273 on the left there. This was a pretrial reform bill, they call it. I mean, this was a big bill, single subject or not, I don't know. This was covered a lot of ground. Basically, I'm glad it might be a good thing this one failed. Would have prohibited certain people from being arrested, put restrictions on bond, keep jail populations as low as possible, create admission standards for jails. I mean, there's definitely a need for criminal justice reform, but some of these I'm not so sure on. Let's dig into 273. So it would no longer require police to issue tickets instead of arrests for people suspected of committing Class 5 and Class 6 felonies. It's a significant concession from the lead sponsor. So they did make some adjustments to it, it looks like here. It did still fail. Senate Bill 273 would mandate that officers not arrest people who are suspected of committing a range of crimes below the felony level. So it includes traffic, municipal, and nonviolent misdemeanor crimes. So this, actually, now looking into it, I'm glad it did fail. This is what we're seeing right now in San Francisco, where people are just walking in. Thieves are walking into Walgreens, Target, stores, and just taking stuff off the shelves, loading up pillowcases and trash bags full of goods, and then stealing them from the business. And the police won't arrest those people. They give them a ticket, but they're not going to arrest them. Well, what good is that going to do? I mean, if somebody's stealing from somebody else, they should probably be held accountable. Senate Bill 182 was a school discipline bill. That one also failed. That one also got a lot of uproar earlier this year. It would alter arrest standards or reduce arrest standards and lower statewide jail populations. There was some replacement legislation that came after it, but basically that would have caused less grounds for suspension and expulsion, prohibiting school resource officers from arresting students, prohibiting handcuffs on elementary school students, And then it would also would affect charter schools and make charter schools have to follow all these same types of rules and laws. So probably good that these bails failed, even though there is a need for some criminal justice reform. Some other ones that failed, the good gun ones, of course, have been failing, as we saw with the concealed carry on school. Top left here, House Bill 1070 will repeal the ammunition magazine prohibition from Representative Hanks. That right now there's a 15-round limit for gun magazines is all you can legally buy in Colorado. This will repeal that, which definitely needs to happen at some point. That's another big one that I know a lot of good people are working on. Top right, House Bill 1185, repeal government firearms regulations and training class regulation from Pat Neville there, Representative Neville, concerning repealing regulations related to firearms and in connection therewith promoting social distancing and handgun training classes. So that would have been a good one. You'll have to dig into that if you want more details. Bottom left, 1082, gun transfer background check permit exemption. Now this is the one I think Hugh McKean got in trouble on, if I'm not mistaken. It would allow concealed carry permit holders to buy guns without an additional background check. So that's a good thing, right? If you already have gotten a background check to get a firearm, you've already gone through an even more extensive background check and been fingerprinted to get your concealed carry permit, then why should you have to keep going to another background check to a background check to get another firearm? Doesn't make sense, does it? So that's the good part of the bill. The part of the bill I think that was troublesome was that it would prohibit a sheriff from issuing a concealed carry permit without the results of a background check. So there's another gun control bill we'll talk about that did pass, but basically sheriffs up until then, previously sheriffs had the ability to issue a firearm concealed carry permit to somebody without the background check coming back if it was taking too long, if the Colorado Bureau of Investigation or the NICS system, whatever it was taking too long to process the paperwork, then the sheriff at their discretion, if they knew the person, they knew they were a good character, they're a pillar of the community, they can go ahead and give them that permit while still waiting for that result to come back. Probably a good idea. Well, this would have stopped it. So my guess is probably what Hugh McKean did is he tried to sweeten the pot, kind of appease both sides by putting a good part of the bill and a bad part of the bill, thinking that he can win over both Republicans and Democrats. Well, clearly that didn't work because Republicans went after him, gun owners went after him, and of course the Democrats aren't going to support anything that preserves or expands our right to keep and bear arms. Moving on to the bottom right, some stuff was stopped before being introduced. Definitely worth looking into that, but there was an attempt, or at least some conversations about introducing a statewide quote-unquote assault weapons ban. Thankfully, that did not happen. There was a lot of pushback from even a lot of Democrat gun owners who prevented that from becoming law. Good thing there. So, I think the gun issue is a winning issue and will continue to be so, but you got to get involved. And then, of course, as I mentioned previously, the cannabis THC cap. So trying to cap the potency of cannabis that's grown in Colorado. They're going to go start testing plants that people are growing. I mean, absolutely and utterly stupid. Then people would have to smoke twice as much to get the same effect. Doesn't make sense, but a lot of this stuff doesn't really make sense now, does it? And now moving on to some of the criminal justice legislation that passed. Some of this stuff might upset you here. In particular, top left, Senate Bill 78, lost or stolen firearms, concerning the responsibility of an individual firearm owner to report a missing firearm. The governor signed that. Senator Lewis, Danielson, Rep. Sullivan, and Rep. Herod think that if your gun is stolen, if you lose your gun, if you don't know where it's at, you lose it in a boating accident, well, by goodness, you're going to become a criminal if you don't go tell the authorities about it within a very specific time frame. Absolute idiocy, basically trying to criminalize gun ownership in any way they can. That now with Senate Bill 78, Colorado gun owners must report a lost or stolen firearm to law enforcement within 5 days of realizing the weapon is missing. Failing to report a lost or stolen firearm is a civil offense punishable by a $25 fine. A second or subsequent infraction is an unclassified misdemeanor punishable by a maximum fine of $500. Those criminal penalties are actually quite a bit higher initially, but then they came down a little bit on the final version of the bill. So basically, the whole idea of what they're trying to do, these anti-gun authoritarian types, is control and restrict gun ownership and track guns. They want to be able to know where every gun is at and have control over them that way. House Bill 1106, top right, safe storage of firearms, concerning measures to secure firearms to prevent use by persons not lawfully permitted to possess firearms. So this was Duran, Millica, Bridges, and Hansen, some of the dimwits in the legislature. So now starting on July 1st, 2021, as we've seen, the governor signed this bill back in April. Coloradans who own guns are required to store their weapons in a gun safe or with a trigger or cable lock when the owner knows or should reasonably know that a juvenile or a resident who is ineligible to possess a firearm can gain access to the firearm. So if you're not locking your gun up, you're going to be a criminal in Colorado. All right, House Bill 1298, bottom left there, expand firearm transfer background check requirements. Friends, background checks are basically getting the government's permission to buy and sell firearms, absolutely an affront to our right to keep and bear arms and our sacred right to self-defense. In 2013, the Colorado Legislature passed this universal background check, aka gun registration system, into law. This bill expands that by closing the so-called Charleston loophole. So as we discussed in that Hugh McKean bill earlier, this would require gun dealers to complete a background check on a gun buyer before transferring a weapon. So previously, and in many states across the country, if you go to buy a firearm and the background check's backed up for a couple days, but the gun dealer knows you're of good mind and character, he could go ahead and give you the gun while he's waiting for the results to come back. With this law, they're no longer able to do that. It also prohibits people from purchasing a gun if they have been convicted of certain misdemeanors within the past 5 years. So basically, they're trying to take away the right of people to be able to defend themselves if they committed certain crimes. So the Democrats are not good on criminal justice reform. They're making more criminals in society. Please remember that. Senate Bill 256, local regulation of firearms. This might be the scariest piece of legislation regarding our gun rights this year. But this measure would allow local governments, public higher education institutions, and special districts to enact gun policies that are stronger than what's written in state law. So this means a bolder assault weapons ban could come back, which we saw the courts defeat earlier this year. This can mean your local community could all of a sudden decide to outlaw certain types of gun ownership. Now, how will that square with the state constitution, which we saw earlier defends your right to keep and bear arms, as well as the Second Amendment? Well, those battles will have to be fought in the court, but this basically gives more power to your local government to restrict your rights to self-defense. Egregious, evil, authoritarian, use whatever descriptor you like. I won't swear, but feel free to. Top left, House Bill 1317, regulating marijuana concentrates. We talked about that previously. This is a horrific bill that really goes after marijuana concentrates, meaning that if people who buy, what do you call it, like shatter or butter, I mean, all these different types of wax, whatever they're called, different types of marijuana products that are extremely potent, that some people take for chronic pain issues, other people take for they have to do just one dab and then they don't have to smoke for a day or so. This basically restricts the ability of people to buy those legally. So now incentivizing black market operators to sell and manufacture marijuana concentrates basically is what they're doing. Also, this creates a medical marijuana registry. So now the government will track people who buy certain marijuana. If you buy more than 2 ounces of flour or 8 grams of concentrate, then basically they can keep track of you and make sure you're not buying more than you're legally allowed. So I thought cannabis was decriminalized. I guess it isn't. People should be upset if you are a marijuana user, a cannabis user, or a medical patient, then your rights were under assault this year. Senate Bill 56 in the top right. This was a good one. Expand cannabis-based medicine at schools. Medical marijuana at schools, so kids who have seizures, the whole Charlotte's Web story, all of that. This is a good thing. Bottom left, 1299. This one is straight out of the Soviet era, creating an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So there's a new government office where they're going to meet and discuss ways to infringe your rights to keep and bear arms and come up with new plans, basically creating this bureaucracy organization that exists solely to go after guns. Unbelievable, folks. Unbelievable. You'd think it's the Soviet Union. House Bill 1250, measures to address law enforcement accountability. So this was, there's actually some good stuff in here. This harkens back to last year's big mega police reform bill, criminal justice bill that came out. So this one has to do with radio encryption, which is actually good. It kind of requires police to be able to give the media access to encrypted radio under certain circumstances. Not a bad thing. A duty to report excessive force. So if a law enforcement officer sees another cop excessive force, they have to report it. AG has subpoena power, so the Attorney General can subpoena power these local law enforcement organizations. De-escalation, civil action, whistleblower protections, clarifies body camera use. So there's some good stuff in there. Of course, I'm sure the bill will be used, the legislation will be used to further infringe upon our rights and remove local control of our local law enforcement. However, there's probably some good stuff as well. Criminal justice legislation that passed continued here. Top left, 1090, criminal marijuana offenses. This increased the the limit that people can legally own or possess at a time as 1 ounce up to 2 ounces. So hey, some progress there. Top right, House Bill 1251, appropriate use of chemical restraints on a person. So I believe the governor just signed this one, but limits ketamine use by paramedics. Will it make much of a difference? We'll see. Why didn't they just ban forced injections in the state of Colorado? Well, I think we know why they wouldn't want to do that. All right, bottom left, House Bill 1255, protection order issued against domestic abuser. So it requires people who have a restraining order because of a domestic abuse. They must submit to a judge within 7 business days an affidavit, including the list of the type and number of firearms they own, as well as the location of these weapons. So the idea is that somebody who's charged or convicted of domestic abuse relinquish their firearms. So I guess a restraining order is substantially legally binding, I guess, from a judge to be able to do that. But the idea that you're charged with a crime but not convicted of it and you still have to give up your guns, I don't like that piece of it. We'll see how this plays out. Senate Bill 271 in your bottom right. Misdemeanor reform. This one did pass. Another sweeping piece of legislation. Rewrite Colorado's misdemeanor laws, changing the maximum sentence of a Class 1 misdemeanor to 364 days in jail and a fine of $1,000, down from 18 months in jail and a fine of $5,000. These are maximum sentences. For Class 2 misdemeanors, the penalty is now 12 days in jail and a fine of up to $750. Used to be 364 days in jail and a fine of $1,000. Class 3 misdemeanors are eliminated. A number of crimes are also reclassified. Probably a good bill. I don't know all the meat on that one, but probably a good thing. Moving on, talk a little bit about education as well. I'm just going to throw that in here. House Bill 1295 thankfully failed, but basically Ready Colorado called it the greatest threat to charter schools in Colorado history. They said basically it would make it easier to shut down charter schools. So this is Senator Tammy Story, one of the worst in the state legislature, and Representative Bacon, basically trying to go after charter schools and make it easier for them to be shut down. Unbelievable, folks. Unbelievable. Some of the other bills here, House Bill 1304. I believe this one passed, if I'm not mistaken, but Department of Early Childhood Education. I mean, it's pretty scary, universal preschool system. They want to take your children away from you and start indoctrinating them at an earlier age than ever. House Bill 1164, slowly allow school districts to raise their mill levy rates to just take more of your money to give it to those teacher unions, I'm sure, and the administrators. House Bill 1103 requires that the State Board of Education revise its academic content standards for reading, writing, and civics to include media literacy. That's right, folks. Do you really trust the State Board of Education or the public school teachers to teach your kids about media literacy? Tell them what's fake news or not. What should they believe, what they shouldn't. Craziness. All right, moving on. Still got a little bit to go here, my friends. Thanks for sticking with us. We're about an hour and a half in. Got a little bit left. Other legislation of interest. These are some low-effort memes right here, but I love this one, the top left. Colorado, if the General Assembly only met every 100 years instead of every year. New laws versus old laws. Increase freedom or draw 25. Well, we got a lot of cards there. Yeah, politicians don't take your rights away, but they can violate them. The politicians can violate your rights, they can ignore your rights, but they can't give you rights, they can't take them away. Those are always with you. So some of the legislation I wanted to bring up to kind of close out here, some of the last slides, was House Bill 1232, Standardized Health Benefit Plan, quote, the Colorado option. So thankfully, the public option was removed to create basically state-run health insurance. But now it does create this Colorado option. Now, so now insurance companies are required to sell the Colorado option plan across the state, and government regulators set the price of medical services to achieve savings. So we're talking price controls. Price controls lead to shortages. Politicians and bureaucrats have no idea. They don't have enough information to tell you what the price of something should be. That's what the free market does. For them to cap prices and try and control the economy, it's only going to lead to poverty and a lack of supplies for people, or a lack of services. Top right, Senate Bill 123. Expand Canadian prescription import program. This is a good one. I did like that. Concerning expanding the Canadian prescription drug importation program to include prescription drug suppliers from nations other than Canada upon the enactment of legislation by the United States Congress authorizing such practice. Bottom left, 1054, housing public benefit verification requirement. So basically, you don't have to prove that you're legally in the United States to get public housing benefits. So, come on everybody to Colorado, you'll get some housing benefits, even if you're not a U.S. citizen. But taxpayers will pay for it, don't worry about it. House Bill 1049, prohibit discrimination, labor union participation. Of course, this one failed. This is what they call right to work, where joining a union should not be a requirement of the job. And Van Bieber and Ransoms ran this one this year, and of course it failed. A little bit more legislation for you. The consumer right to use natural gas or propane, 1034. This is an issue we're going to see coming up over and over again in the future. Dan Woog, great bill, protect consumers' rights to have natural gas. However, what we're seeing with the state legislature, Governor Polis, Democrats across the United States, they're trying to basically ban the use of natural gas, propane, basically energy. They want everybody to go to electric or renewable, regardless of how efficient or how expensive it is. So we're seeing now in Denver, they're trying to stop new homes from being built that have natural gas, like pipelines running to them, or natural gas piping. This bill would have protected that and said that customer can use gaseous fuels to produce thermal energy if needed. But of course, the Democrats didn't like that one. Senate Bill 82 in your top right, Alcohol Beverage Festival for Tasting and Sales. That one did become law, so that was a good one. That one basically allows alcohol beverage license holders to hold festivals for alcohol beverage retail activity. So, you're talking about breweries, going to festivals, hosting events, tasting, selling alcohol at different events. And that's a good one. Small step in the right direction. And the top or bottom left here, Senate Bill 132. I could spend a whole hour talking about this one, but this is the digital communications regulation by Senator Donovan and Rep. Titione. These two people are some of the dumbest, craziest authoritarian types. I mean, talk about Big Brother. This is absolutely ridiculous. This bill, Senate Bill 132, got beat up all across the media across the United States. Basically, to give you the short of it, so the law professor Eugene Volk, he said this bill would, quote, create a, quote, digital communications commission, end quote. So Colorado's very own Ministry of Truth to investigate thought crime pertaining to the publication of views that promote hate speech, undermine election integrity, disseminate intentional disinformation, conspiracy theories, or fake news, or authorize, encourage, or carry out violations of users' privacy. So basically, this would make the state, if this bill would have passed, this digital communications regulation, then the state government would be going through social media platforms and trying to manipulate the speech that's out there. The speech people's websites like freestatecolorado.com, the Telegram channel, they would say, well, you can't talk about the election. You can't talk about what we say is fake news. I mean, this would have been, it was a total assault on the First Amendment. It probably wouldn't have made it anywhere. It had been challenged in court pretty much instantly. But nonetheless, that there's this level of discourse in society right now where politicians think that they can somehow try and regulate our speech. I mean, this is outright authoritarianism, fascism, communism, whatever you want to call it. It's evil. Volk continues on in his scathing indictment of this bill. He says, quote, "None of these terms are defined in the bill. The bill is all about suppressing the unfair or discriminatory speech." Unfair speech, okay? "If the Ministry of Truth determines that the respondent engaged in an unfair or discriminatory digital communications practice," the bill says, "the Commission may issue and cause to be served on the respondent an order requiring the respondent to cease and desist from the practice and to take action that the Commission orders." So the idea is that basically they would shut down websites, shut down social media pages, just basically silence people who are challenging the narrative that they didn't want discussed. Government censorship of political speech is what it is. You got to read into this. It's absolutely and utterly insane. Carrie Donovan is one of the most radical people in the legislature. I think she's running for U.S. Congress right now. I mean, this lady needs to go home and go work on her ranch and learn and maybe read the Constitution and read some Rothbard, Mises, Hayek. Just study some stuff here, lady. Titione, on the other hand, is a complete nutcase. All right, Senate Bill 175 in the bottom right. Prescription Drug Affordability Review Board. This one would create a state board to determine whether drugs are affordable. If the medication is deemed unaffordable, the Prescription Drug Affordability Board would have the power to set maximum prices that can be charged in Colorado. Take that, pharmacists. If you're charging too much for life-saving medicine, then guess what? We're not going to let you sell it in Colorado. So you better not sell. You better not sell your medicine in Colorado, is what this bill says. This would lead to shortages. Price controls are always a bad thing. It would cause massive shortages where people aren't going to be able to buy medicine. They're going to be having to go out of state to buy it and smuggle it back in. Absolutely and utter economic ignorance. A few more for you, friends. We got Senate Bill 190 on the left, protect personal data privacy. Now, this one did pass. Give consumers the right to tell companies to stop tracking their personal data and delete it. Part of me likes that bill, but I really do not like the idea of the government interfering between businesses and consumers. So it's a comprehensive consumer privacy law that California and Virginia also have. Problem with this bill is you're creating barriers, or you're making it harder for people who are providing good and service to reach their consumers. You're making it harder for people who want to buy a good and service to find out who's actually providing it to them, because there's not this type of marketing available where people can, track everybody's purchases and social media history and then match up products and services to people who want them. So you're causing a delay in the information between suppliers and consumers from receiving that information about what people want. I hope that was clear. It might not have been, but it's a bad bill in general. Top right, 1162, management of plastic products. This one did pass. So in 2024, as you may have heard, plastic bags, paper bags have a 10-cent fee. Well, it starts in 2023. In 2024, they'll be banned. So styrofoam containers, polystyrene, whatever containers will be banned as well. Last couple here. Environmental justice, disproportionate impacted community in the left, 1266. So this is all one of these environmental bills that would basically mandate oil and gas to stop their production, to stop polluting, to stop producing oil and gas basically in Colorado. I mean, creating an environmental justice omnibus person, an advisory board, directs Air Quality Control Commission to establish a fee on greenhouse gas emissions, to adopt and implement rules limiting greenhouse gas emissions from certain sectors, potentially through a tradable emissions credit program. It also directs the AQCC to update permitting requirements for sources that affect disproportionately impacted communities, requires electric utilities to file clean energy plans with the Public Utilities Commission, increases state revenue, of course, and expenditures on an ongoing basis. I mean, this bill was absolutely and utterly insane, environmental injustice, and basically just going after businesses and going after the free market by trying to restrict economic activity for their own agenda. Top right, 1117, local government authority, promote affordable housing units. So this is basically allowing local jurisdictions to implement rent control. So that's not going to be good. That's going to cause housing shortages, of course, and creating ghettos. But 1027 on the bottom right. Continue alcohol, beverage, takeout, and delivery. Minor good one here. Restaurants have until July 2025 to sell takeout alcohol, although they can only sell it from 7 a.m. to midnight, like the rest of Colorado's alcohol industry. But that's great. When you order takeout food, you can get a beer with it, overpriced beer. But anyways, a couple more. Last few bills I want to talk about. Top left, Senate Bill 9. Reproductive health care program, basically taxpayer-funded abortions for illegal aliens. So there you go. Self-explanatory. Senate Bill 64, top right, retaliation against an elected official. This obviously is a sign of the times that the legislatures, that politicians in general, and people in the political class are facing a lot of wrath and a lot of anger from people in the community. So, of course, what the politicians want to do is pass another law. So an individual, governor did sign this one, an individual commits a crime who makes a credible threat against or commits an act of harassment as retaliation or retribution against an elected official, their family members, or close relations, or a person residing in the same household. So be careful with your cyberbullying, my friends, because they might come after you on that. Bottom left, ranked choice voting in nonpartisan elections. There you go. Concerning the use of ranked choice voting in nonpartisan elections, a very interesting topic for another time. House Bill 1107 and 1015 in the bottom, making it illegal to dox, which is share a person's private information online in a way that poses a serious or imminent threat. So that's a public health worker or employee at state prisons or public defenders. So this is a response, obviously, to last year when people were threatening and harassing state health department workers or county health department workers for all the COVID tyranny. So they're basically saying, yeah, we know people are upset about them, so just don't say where they live because people will start coming after them, these government workers. All right, well, Senate Bill 69, the last one we'll talk about. Allow Colorado's Division of Motor Vehicles to begin selling the state's retro license plates, the ones with green mountains, for an extra charge. So there you go. You'll start seeing those again at some point. It also clamps down on people skirting new vehicle registration fees. They never let a bill go to waste. So to wrap up here, the question is, of course, where do we go from here? Where do we go after this year we saw so much infringement upon our rights and our liberties? So what we're seeing in the future is the 2022 legislative session. So we have another legislative session before the election coming up in 2022. So the 2022 election will see 17 Senate seats and 65 House seats up for grabs. So this is going to be an incredible opportunity for liberty activists, for those of us who are upset with the authoritarianism we've experienced since the beginning of 2020. This is our chance to kind of reverse that trend and get good liberty-minded constitutional people into the office. Also got to say that ballot initiatives for freedom could be a good bet for liberty activists, for those who want to see more freedom in our state. We've seen tax cuts, gambling, passed just this last year, expanding some of our freedoms that way. As well, of course, you can't forget Tabor and Amendment 64. And then coordinated activism, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for people to come together. So I do want to say that the criminal Colorado capital cabal is not omnipotent. There is division in their ranks. There is anger among the people. They are limited. And through the actions of dedicated liberty activists, they can be limited much more. So thank you very much for watching this presentation. You can find my work at freestatecolorado.com, on Telegram at t.me/freestatecolorado. I'm working on putting together a monthly email newsletter, maybe doing some political action committee work, legislative alerts, election news. I want to be a hub for liberty activists and have some resources for organizers, those who are trying to scale back the power of government and provide a more free and sane society for us all. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time. Take care, and